in the town that I now call home. So I greatly appreciate that, and so does everyone at Media Freedom Foundation and Project Censored. Just a quick note, this lecture series will run the second Tuesdays. So we'll be here, of course, this evening. We'll be here October 6th for the Project Censored book release, Media Freedom on the Line. Our new book is out next month. In November, we will be joined, hopefully, by investigative journalist Peter Byrne, another local. In fact, his office is just right down there, on his new series published on breast cancer called Busted. We actually interviewed him on our KPFA radio show some time ago, and it's absolutely really groundbreaking journalism. And we are looking forward to Peter Byrne's participation. And we will likely be rounding out the series in December with our good friends Stephanie Van Hook and Michael Negler of the Meta Center. So the series really, we're really going from the global to the local. We're going to, of course, look at the news that doesn't make the news and analyze why, but we're also going to hopefully offer positive solutions for the many challenges we face as a society. And I will be your host for the fall. Again, if I didn't introduce myself, I'm Mickey Huff. I'm the director of Project Censored. I'm also... I'm also a professor of history and social science at Diablo Valley College in the Bay Area, where I co-chair the history department. And I work with a lot of students. That's kind of what I do, and that's actually what we do at Project Censored, a lot of media literacy and working with students. Just for an average of the last 3-4 books we've done, we've averaged working with about 250 students, 50 professors on 20 campuses across the United States. And we're in the process of really formalizing our equitable pathways from junior college to state college or four-year college to graduate school with our media literacy and Project Censored type curriculum. We're teaming up with ACME, the media literacy organization, and also a graduate program at Sacred Heart University in Connecticut. So we have a lot of things going on, and we have a lot of students that are coming that are going to be part of the series this fall. So we're looking forward to bringing them up. And in fact, I'd like to start the series in the evening. Tonight, I'm going to formally introduce our speakers in a moment, but we're really blessed to have Professor Marc Pilisuk here up from Berkeley, and I'm going to formally introduce him in a moment, but really towering figure in peace studies, and his new book is fantastic. We're also joined tonight by another great professor, Susan Rahman, who teaches at College of Marin and who works with us at Project Censored, and what I'd like to do is to get things started and to highlight this is the main reason that we do the things that we do is because of the students and because of education and because of media literacy. And two of the students I'd like to bring up now, Alexandria McDowell and Caitlin McCoy, and they want to just talk briefly about how they got started with Project Censored working with Susan Rahman at College of Marin.
Hi, thank you for coming out tonight. I'm Alexandria. I got first started with Project Censored with Susan Rahman. I took one of her fieldwork study classes, and she recommended volunteer work. I'm a political science major, and Project Censored felt like the right fit for me. It was news that wasn't being broadcast on that main news stage that I'm so used to seeing. I went to high school during 9/11, for example, and all we did was glue our minds to that television screen, waiting for the CNN, MSNBC, Fox News to tell us what next was happening in the world. And it just wasn't good enough for me. And when I came up with Project Censored, or came in contact with them, I realized that this was a good fit for me. And so I really enjoy researching stories, which is what I'm doing with them now with the radio show. And for me, it's just been fulfilling and really great. I've been with them for about a year and a half now, I would say. And I plan on being with them for as long as I can. So I'll hand it over to Caitlin, and she can tell you her story.
Hi guys, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak in front of all of you. Thanks for coming out. I also found out about Project Censored through Susan. I was invited by another student of hers to come out to Copperfield Books during their Banned Books Week, and I heard Mickey speak about Project Censored. My friend and I got really pumped, and last semester we spent all our time volunteering for the project. It was great. And again, I am working with them this year. Last year I did a lot of different things. I worked on the radio program once. I also did a lot of editing, story verification, the same as she did, and I wrote my own stories as well, one of which is going to be published in the book that comes out next month. I'm really excited. So Project Censored is a great way of getting people from all walks of life involved in media literacy, but really its focus on students is amazing. There is no program currently in schools that is meant to teach students how to find news that is actually worthy of their attention. Instead, we're just sort of fed, you know, here's the entertainment, here's the sports, here's the world news that we think you should, you know, be aware of, but it's all with a very interesting sort of spin to it. There are no programs out there that teach people how to be critical, that teach people how to find news stories that are not what are just being fed to them, and Project Censored works really hard to do that. So I am very excited to continue working with them. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex and Caitlin. So let's jump into tonight's program. I also like to remind people that as a nonprofit, we don't take donations from large corporations. We don't even deal with foundations because of the strings there. So all the money we really get are from donors, individuals, people that buy books, movies. This is our award-winning DVD that's available. And in fact, one of the filmmakers, Christopher Oscar, was right there. And I'd like to thank Christopher and Doug Hecker for their great work on this DVD. And also, we continue to publish a book a year with 7 Stories Press, 2015, Inspiring We the People, with a foreword by Ralph Nader, is here, and it's chock full of things that, of course, many of you in the room may be aware of, but the corporate news media have an allergy toward. So, really great things to pick up and share. And as you see, like I said, we continue to do these every year. And so we're entering our 39th, going on 40th year now. And again, this term here, the next several months, will be highlighting a lot of the work from people in the books. So we hope you can come out for more. Well, let's jump into tonight's subject. And while it's certainly a heavy topic, right? Looking at the deeper causes of violence can be painful. And who wants to be reminded of the extent of destruction, killing, and mayhem that goes on as a product of empire? Such an examination, however, may be our best hope for ending the dysfunctional system and replacing it with one that brings out the best in us. And tonight's speakers are really going to address in some different ways those issues. So Marc Pilisuk teaches at Saybrook University and is a professor emeritus of human and community development at the University of California, Davis. He's former president of the Society for the Study of Peace, Conflict, and Violence, and a steering committee member of Psychologists for Social Responsibility. He's published 10 books and more than 140 articles over an academic career spanning 5 decades. So please give a warm round of applause and welcome to Professor Marc Pilisuk. Marc is joined this evening by our Project Censored affiliate professor, also fellow board member at Media Freedom Foundation, Professor Susan Rahman, Dr. Susan Rahman, who was a student with Marc Pilisuk, and that story will get even more generationally interesting when Dr. Peter Phillips walks in the door, the former director of Project Censored, who was one of Marc's students 20 years ago. So Marc Pilisuk has left quite a legacy of people following in his footsteps, and I'm looking forward to you hearing Marc. Susan Rahman is a mother and activist, a professor of sociology, psychology, and behavioral sciences at the College of Marin. Her doctoral research took her to the West Bank last summer, where she connected with family and conducted interviews of women who resist the Israeli occupation. Her work is inspired by the people of Palestine, who show great strength and resiliency, and she is also a contributor, once again, to the Project Censored books, not just in what happened to previous year's stories, but she did a chapter this year with Tara Dorabji called Existence is Resistance, Women in Occupied Palestine and Kashmir. And Susan Rahman and Marc Pilisuk, I welcome you here. Please come on up and share your thoughts and your work with the people at AQUS CAFÉ. Thanks so much for being here.
How you doing out there? Can you hear me? What?
Louder, louder, louder. No, it's not on.
Okay, can you hear me?
Not very well.
Can you hear me now? Okay, so it's really great to be here. I'm from the Bay Area. I went to a museum in Oakland which shares something with Project Censored in that it's a people's museum rather than a museum of rare artifacts. And there's a place where you can get your own photograph in the museum with a frame on it. And I have one that says Ancient Relic, and there's a picture of me now in the Oakland Museum. The book that I want to talk about tonight has a co-author. The co-author is Dr. Jennifer Rountree. She was a student of mine, and of all of the publications that I have, more than half of them, including the books and the articles, are co-authored with students who have done most of the work and let me get most of the credit for it. So what I want to do tonight is really take just a moment to follow up on what the student interns were saying about the news that you don't see on the media. And again, you referred to the time of the crisis of the war in Iraq, and you would get these talking heads that would come up and would argue about whether there are or not destructive weapons to be found there. And so these talking, I wanted to go behind this, and all of you are familiar with the concept of networking. Networking, if you really want to get something done with somebody that you trust, you go to your network and you ask. And there is a network of these people who are providing the experts on the talking heads on the media. And I want to just read to you one of the credentials of one of these experts at that time. This is the Secretary of the Navy, Gordon England, who was appointed the 72nd Secretary of the U.S. Navy, 2001. In this position, England led America's Navy and Marine Corps, was responsible for more than 800,000 military and civilian personnel, had an annual budget of more than $120 billion. He joined the Department of Homeland Security 2 years later. Prior to joining the administration of George W. Bush, Mr. England was Executive Vice President of General Dynamics Corporation, where he was responsible for two major corporate sectors: information systems and technology and international contracting. Previously, he had served as Executive Vice President of the Combat Systems Group, President of General Dynamics Fort Worth Aircraft Company, later of Lockheed, President of General Dynamics Land Systems. So such government corporate connections are common, but the corporations are also connected with one another. One can track the board memberships of England's General Dynamics colleagues as well as the accounting and law firms that serve General Dynamics. So among the General Dynamics board, there are retired generals, admirals, directors of the major financial firms like Morgan Chase, LLC Investment Banking. There are representatives of the food industry, Sarah Lee, and of pharmaceuticals, Sharing Plow. So they don't give you this in the introduction to when this talking head comes on. They tell you this is an experienced individual who is there to deliver you the truth, and you listen to him. But it's those connections that are extremely important, because they define a group of people who have extreme wealth and power. And it's not a conspiracy. They don't run everything. but they do meet. They do meet sometimes secretly. They don't make policy, but they discuss their common bonds that they have and their common interests. And then they go back home. And where is home? Home is to all of these corporations, all of the news media corporations. And then they deliver what they have to deliver. And we get the package, the perceptual management package that is consistent with their staying in control and having great amounts of power. So in a sense, that's partly what the book is about. The book is about a group of people whose decisions are in large measure, not entirely their own decisions, because we all participate in the system, but in large measure, most of the direct violence that we see around us can be traced back to decisions that they've made. And most of the indirect violence, the hunger, the poverty, the people escaping from places where their homelands were devastated, where they can no longer make a living, and the persecuted refugees, most of that is attributable to the decisions of this same group. And rather than a sign of despair, and these are not necessarily evil people, these are people who believe that their success was predicated on the fact that they know better than the rest of us what is good for all of us. After all, they made it. And it's for us to be able to find cracks in that network for all of the wonderful projects that we do on a daily basis to mitigate the harm of the victims of violence. For all of us who work to build something that's sustainable, that's not governed by the major marketplace. For all of us to see where those levers are to be able to make an inroad, to change the system, so that we not only improve the lives of people on a very local level, but we give hope to a vision of a more peaceful world. Susan, why don't you talk?
You can talk more, right? Okay. He'll talk more too. Okay. Hi. So I'm a sociologist, so backstories are always really fascinating to me, and I get that you figured out 2 of my students are here. My professor is also here. He's right next to me, and none of this, I would say most of this wouldn't be happening. I certainly probably wouldn't be sitting here if it weren't for him. So I love this kind of the teacher teaching the student and the student teaching the teacher, and that kind of dynamic that's happening in my life as a teacher, and then getting to work with people coming back into the field. But if anybody gets a chance to ever work with Marc or sit down with Marc, he's amazing. So okay, I'm probably the president of his fan club, so I'll stop now. But I use his book in my global social problems class, and so I bring him in to talk to my students, and they listen to his stories, and they're blown away, and it's really wonderful. And you're coming back in January, right? Okay. And actually, this is the newer version of it, so if nobody's checked it out yet, you should definitely check it out. So, you know, a lot of what goes on in his book is talking about, you know, how things happen, how this structure of violence kind of perpetuates how society functions through this, you know, corporate kind of ruling class. And so I spend a lot of time talking about those sorts of things with my students, and it's depressing, right? I mean, if you really think about it, this can be stuff that really makes you sad. So one of the things in Marc's book is he has in the beginning of his books, he talks about self-care. And I think it's really important because, you know, I think knowledge is power, but I also think the more we know, the harder it is to not, you know, be upset about it. So I think Project Censored is a solution to that. I use Project Censored in my class with my students because once I tell them, you know, the evils, or I don't tell them the evils of society, but when we start getting into it, they get kind of upset, you know, as do we all. And so calling out the media for what it is, and then taking initiative as researchers to go look at what other stories are being told, what other narratives are there in the culture, in the world, that aren't being shared. And that's empowering. And that's where I think change is possible. So, you know, along those lines, my research was all about telling the story of the untold. Women who live under occupation in the West Bank. And so, as a Palestinian American, I never had to live under occupation. I always had the privilege of being an American citizen. But for me, it was really important to go back and to see my family and to interview women who resist occupation. And so last summer, that's what I did. And that was my doctoral research. So I got to Saybrook, which is where I studied with Marc. And my first week there, we went to this intensive training thing. And I met him, and he was talking about, oh God, what, do you remember? It was like, it was something righteous, right? I don't remember what it was. God, I should have written it down, I'm sorry. It's been a long day. I had to go to back to school night for my daughter, and I worked all day. So anyways, pardon me for forgetting that. But so I went up to him after his talk, and I said, you know, my name's Susan, I'm new here, I'm gonna be studying, I'm interested in studying Palestine because I'm Palestinian. And he grabbed me by the hand, and he's like, I know who you have to meet. You have to meet Donna, who ended up being someone I traveled with there and who's like a sister to me now. But then he also just took me under his wing and said, what do you want to do? How do you want to do this? Let's have lunch. And well, I was hooked. So he was clearly my chair of my dissertation committee, and he was the person that I worked with most closely while I was there. But he supported me the whole way. You know, there's a lot of people who probably don't really want to delve into that issue too deeply because it is, it's a difficult one, right? Occupation, all sorts of history. There's a lot of things about it that are really painful and bring up a lot of issues for people based on a lot of different reasons. So, but Marc, he happily took it on, happily supported me, would let me vent when I got angry, would let me cry when I needed to cry. And believe me, I did a lot of crying when I was in Palestine. I met a lot of people who went through a lot of horrible, horrible things as a result of living under a military occupation. I met women who lost children to the occupation. I met one woman who lost 2 children, not just one, because they went out and did nonviolent protests in Byrne. I don't know how many of you guys have ever seen 5 Broken Cameras, but that's a really good film to see. So the filmmakers' 2 cousins, well, they were siblings, they both got killed, one with a tear gas canister and one just was straight up shot for nonviolent civil disobedience. I met another woman who was married to a man who was jailed during the first Intifada, the first uprising in 1987, and he was in jail, and they had 1 kid, but she knew that by the time that he got out, she wouldn't be able to have babies anymore because she'd be too old. So she heard on the radio of another woman who smuggled sperm out of the jail, her husband's sperm, and so she did the same thing. So she went in and she smuggled his sperm out and ran to a doctor and got it inseminated. So I sat in the room with her and her 1-year-old son, and I interviewed her and I listened to her story. Stuff that we take for granted is, we should check our privilege, because the way that life is there is just crazy. It's really crazy. It's sad and it's oppressive. And I would be delighted to speak with anybody individually about that at one point this evening. But I'm going to give it back to Marc now and maybe see what he has to say.
So I want to pick up on the Palestine-Israeli question. Typically, the image that we get if somebody says Palestinian is that somewhere within that group, depending upon whether you're a conservative or a liberal, you think it's either the large group or a small group, but there are some Arab terrorists there who act as snipers and are eager to retaliate against Israel for whatever level of justification they might have in doing it. And that's the image that's conveyed. When the word Palestine is brought up in the media, that's what we think. There are these Palestinian Arab terrorists. And the interesting thing about it is, of course, that is part of that packaged media that does not, that can take an incident and make it into a reality and ignore a reality that's much broader than that interest. So I want to say something about that broader reality. Israel is in the place where it is a militarily occupying country. It is occupying lands, not only those that were afforded to it by a United Nations treaty in which the people in Palestine had nothing to say about, but also a large amount of land that they have usurped and was not legally theirs under any form of treaty. And Israel retains, despite the criticism that it has garnered worldwide and from large numbers of people, from the American Jewish population as well, that it is mistreating the Arab population within the borders in which it exercises control. Despite that criticism, it's amazing that you will not hear a political figure say something about the Middle East without first starting, we have to be loyal to our friends, the only democracy, Israel. I don't have to be loyal to my own country, I have to be loyal to, and so what does that mean? What does that mean? I mean, it doesn't mean that the different administrations are stupid. It means that they are part of the military wing of that larger network that we've talked about. There is a strategic military organization, again, part of that group that meets sometimes secretly, sometimes publicly, and determines some of the standard things that we take for granted. Yes, there should be an exorbitant military budget. Yes, Israel should be getting more than any other portion of that country. And why? Because Israel is in a dominant place in the Middle East where its control of the Suez and its acquiescence to American foreign policy will protect that center of power, which will exist regardless of whether there's a Republican or a Democratic administration. It will continue. It's not that there won't be differences. Some differences might be better for the Palestinian people or not as good. But that structure of all of that weaponry flowing in will remain. And so one of the consequences of that, not only do we in this country grow numb to that, to the realization that that's the money that's not going into our schools or into our healthcare system, but also to Israeli society, which is predicated on an assumption about another stage of violence, severe, horrid violence against the Jewish people. And part of the trauma that they have has made them vulnerable to the myth that they only exist by virtue of being militarily powerful. and being on guard against these people who want to get rid of them. That's a hard road to hoe. It creates a tremendous amount of violence and inhumanity, and it makes the projects that people like Susan do, and the many projects of peacekeeping that go on, it makes them more difficult, but it also makes them more miraculous. That it's like the grass growing up through the cracks in the sidewalk. That somehow that sense of human dignity really keeps on emerging, despite the military occupation, despite the large flows of money, despite the weaponry. It's a tribute to the human spirit. So thank you for doing it, sis.
We just love each other, can't you tell? So I'm hearing two things, kind of beyond the best interest of a nation is the best interest of a corporation or corporate interests or war machines or those kinds of things. That's taking precedence over the United States' best interest, I would say, if all that military aid is going there and we don't have money to fund our schools and we don't have money to fix our roads and all the things that we think need to be done here are not being done because that money is somewhere else. You know, a budget is a moral decision. It's not as if there's only a certain amount of money. Well, there is a certain amount of money, but where it's going is decided, right? It's decided by people. And people are deciding that that money is better spent in another country so that they can militarize rather than helping us grow as a nation, both in developing our children, taking care of our environment, all the things that probably most people in this room are interested in seeing happen. So that's, you know, that's an important issue. No matter how much or how little you care about the specific issue, I think when you think about, as a taxpayer, that all of that money that you pay in taxes is not coming back into your nation, I think it's something to be thought about. And then the other thing I think that Marc brought up that I think is really important is that this operating out of a place of fear, which is a lot of what's going on in terms of how we make decisions also. So it's, you know, we need to go bomb people, we need to be strong. And instead of being strong, you know, with our intelligence and with our negotiations, we're just gonna bomb you. And I mean, that's kind of short-sighted if you really think about it. So that was just all I wanted to say, and yeah.
Just as a point of segue, there are so many great chapters in the book, and they all flow together so well. And there's a quote from Jefferson, of all people, in front of the disinformation chapters. There's a whole chapter on media disinformation and propaganda, which of course attracted a lot of our attention at Project Censored. And riffing on what Susan and Marc just said, it said, governments constantly choose between telling lies and fighting wars, with the end result always being the same. One will always lead to the other. And, you know, a big focus of the book, and I think what's fantastic, the book is The Hidden Structure of Violence, Who Benefits from Global Violence and War. It's Marc Pilisuk and Jennifer Achord Rountree. By the way, Peter Phillips and I interviewed Marc and Jennifer on the Project Censored show last Friday, and you can check out the link to that. It's a really wonderful discussion with them and with Tara Dorabji, who is author with Susan of the piece on Palestine and Kashmir in our new book. So we certainly invite people to see that. But what's also wonderful is that Marc and Jennifer start this book, and they ask something of the reader, and I want to share that with you because it's something that I think that we as educators ask of our students often, and certainly something that we echo at Project Censored. And this book asks something of the reader. It asks you commit yourself to do 5 things. Face up to the disturbing facts about the forms of global violence. Remind yourself that the numbers reflect real human lives. Like, why can't we wrap our heads around 1.3 million dead Iraqis? That number was out there in 2008. Yet Associated Press would only report 87,000 deaths and use the word only. It just repeatedly is downplayed. Number 2 is refrain from demonizing those most central to the promotion of this violence. Number 3 is the book here names people and organizations, and I would reiterate at Project Censored, you know, Peter Phillips does a lot of work on the transnational class and names names. These are real people with real addresses. right? As Utah Phillips, the folk singer, once said, you know, the earth is being killed, and the people that are killing it have names and addresses, right? Maybe we could visit them and talk to them about this. Number 4, retain the hope that deeper understanding will contribute to empowering each of us in what we do to create a world of peace. And number 5, grapple with this book in doses that fit your needs and find antidotes for the violence and caring contact with people in the renewing powers of mediation, reflection, exercise, music, art, food, laughter, and the beauty of the land. And while I haven't used those words in exact succession, people who routinely come to us and talk to us about Project Censored books say, I can't read it in one sitting, or I have to take it in small doses. Or a woman last week about a radio show says, I'm sorry, I can't listen to the show today, I have to walk my dog on the beach. And I said, good. We will vicariously walk the dog on the beach with you, right? Because we need that. And I think that's a really great reminder. And thank you for putting that at the beginning of the book. Then, if any of this restorative bounty is worth preserving, come back to grapple with the violence that threatens our world and your place securing the future. And really, I can't advocate a book more than this. I'll be using it next semester. It's just a fantastic work, and it really wraps up, you know, decades of Marc's research. So it's an honor to be here with Marc and with Susan to share this information with you. What we'd like to do now, and what we will do every second Tuesday, is after a presentation, we want to spend the rest of the evening talking with you, hearing from you, literally. So if you have questions, if you have comments, I want to walk around and share the mic and have you have your say, whatever it is that you're thinking about what's being discussed for the evening. So if that's okay with you two, we get that started now. Is that okay? I'm going to walk around. How do you buy this book, Marc? It's by Monthly Review Press. Did you bring some with you? Marc has a few copies with him, and the cover price, Marc, is $25. Okay, so we have some over here. A couple. So I'm going to walk around. Those of you that remember the pioneering days of talk show television when Phil Donahue would run around with a microphone, that'll be me. We want that because we need the audio on the video. And by the way, I was remiss in thanking Marc and PCA and John Bertucci and the other great people at Petaluma Community Media who are here, and also Kyle Wilson and Sam here that are doing video work with us. So if you have, anybody here have something they want to say, I want to come around the room, and I'd like to mix it up as much as possible so that it's not all male or what have you. You get what I'm saying? So, you know, diversity of viewpoints is what I'm after here. You know this. So we'll start right here, and then I'm going to come from here to here to here to here, and we'll work our way back.
I have more of a question for you visiting Gaza rather than a statement, but I am curious. The devastating photo of the 3-year-old Iraqi child, the Syrian child, on the beach galvanized international public opinion in a good way. The question I have is, with 550 plus children killed in Gaza, but the American public seems to be, the mainstream appears to be numb to that. How in the world can we wake up people to what's really happening in Gaza?
So just to be clear, I wasn't in Gaza, let me just say that. But I was there right when they started bombing Gaza. So I left kind of around the time that the bombing started. But Gaza is the other occupied part of, so there's West Bank and Gaza, and Israel's in the middle. And my family's from the West Bank. So, but that doesn't matter, because your question is how do we grow some heart about it? Yeah, that's a question of humanity. I mean, I would pass that question to my psychologist friend over here. I'm a sociologist. What I do is I talk about it. You want to see me? Good thing I took a shower. So I think it's about. so how do we build empathy, right? How do we not see other people as other and us? So as a teacher, I mean, for me and how I interact with my students, I talk about us all being one. You know, yes, we're all different, and isn't that lovely? But we're all human, and not just humans. We have we're a part of this larger system, the earth, the living creatures, everything. And so if we can see ourselves in others, I think that helps. But it's true. Palestinians are throwaway people, in so many ways. And I'm a Palestinian, so I can say that, right? If I wasn't a Palestinian, I couldn't probably say that. But it's really easy to overlook us. It's really easy to think that we're labeled, right? We're terrorists, right, Marc? Yeah, not me. But, when labels create prejudice, right? I mean, classic psychology. So if people have ideas in their head about what these guys are doing, then, there was tons of propaganda during the whole Gaza thing that, even the children you needed to worry about the children, right? And that report that came out about the soldiers in Gaza and what they were being ordered to do, they were ordered to shoot everybody, right? Everybody was a terrorist, when in fact, most of them weren't, right? So the propaganda certainly taints people's minds, and the more you listen to it and the more you buy into it, the more likely you are to be able to turn a blind eye. But I mean, compassion, we have to be compassionate for each other if we're going to save the world, whether it be Gaza or here or, Syria or anywhere. That would be what I would say.
I've spent most of my activist life concentrating on the things that you two are talking about, which are mostly outside the country but come from power within the country. And then Andy Lopez was killed, and I turned my attention on Sonoma County and found out everything that we say about national power is true right here in Sonoma County. And I don't know how many of you know that we claim that the sheriff is elected. It's always been a he, has not run opposed in a quarter of a century. Now, he gets chosen behind the scenes by law enforcement. If anybody decides they're going to run against him, they get bought off, and that happened in the last election. And we're asked to ratify him. And I remember growing up in the 50s and 60s and being told that's what communists did, and we didn't do that in democratic countries. So if it's not democratic in the Soviet Union, it's not democratic here. And what we have is a totally unaccountable person. There is no one who oversees the sheriff. They claim the voters do, but the voters don't, because they just get to ratify. And if you really start digging into what's been going on since then, the creation of a task force to study changes to be made in law enforcement, and the office of an independent director to oversee that, and you will find that it's going to mean absolutely nothing, but people will think the job has been done. So while you're thinking about what's happening around the world, most people say, oh, is that stuff still going on? It's going on big time, and it is only going to, it will require public pressure to make any difference whatsoever. Thank you.
Well, maybe I can say something to relate both your issues here. They have to do with the developing of compassion, and I want you to recall for a moment the Little Orphan Annie story. This is a Depression-era story where Daddy Warbucks, who was the ultimate of the military-industrial machine, wants to have a trophy child for Christmas. So he gets somebody donated from an orphanage. He thought all orphans were boys. It turns out this one is a red-headed girl. And she's in his face all the time, wants to find out what he is doing. And so he sort of becomes infatuated with this kid, and he wants to give her everything, and she says, but the kids back at the orphanage don't have anything, so you have to have the party for everybody. So he's got enough money, and he does that. And then when there's some issue about somebody trying to reclaim little orphan Annie, he goes and to his, not friend, but within his network, President Roosevelt, and has the FBI investigate this and assure that little orphan Annie can stay where she is. So here you look at if you were trying to get to Donald Trump's office, or to somebody else's office, or even to the office of your county sheriff, you'd have to go through quite a number of steps to be screened through that. And here is someone who slips under the door. And by slipping under the door, she is touching the humanity of this person who's really a cause of great violence and misery in his life. So that's one thing about identifying the power elite. Beneath, if you can get into the door, beneath that exterior, there is something that speaks to their humanity. The other side of it is, for ordinary people, when you have the reality of someone who is very different from yourself, whom you've had that chance to make that connection, and you can share that connection, then it becomes really hard for somebody to say, but that's not like us. Because that you are like them, and you are making that connection with some kid in the ghetto or someone who needs your help. So that's part of our help. It's part of the building humanity from the bottom up.
I want to thank you, Susan, for your work in Palestine. Okay. Thank you, Susan, for your work in Palestine. And I have a question that's not so much about affirming our humanity, but about politics. And I wonder if either of you could address this question. Do you see any way of leveraging the provisions of the U.S. Foreign Assistance Act and the U.S. Arms Export Act to do something for Palestine? For example, the U.S. Foreign Assistance Act stipulates that our economic aid not go to a country with persistent pattern of human rights violations. And the Arms Export Act stipulates that our armaments be used for defensive purposes only. Thank you.
I start on this. It's kind of interesting that the pro-Palestinian groups who are or pro-peace groups who are raising this as an issue now are being condemned as being promoters of a violent regime. And it's interesting that those promoting following that law is not the same as throwing a rock or being a sniper. In the same way, boycotting is not the same as throwing a rock or being a sniper. These are effective, nonviolent ways to call upon international bodies to uphold what is a just law that we ourselves ascribe to. And what happens is, with the way the media wraps these up, is that they become acts of terror. And we now become afraid of people who are doing these nonviolent acts because they would upset the structure. Is there a way to do something about that? Fight.
Well, I'm talking about Israel's use of our economic aid to, make the lives of Palestinians intolerable. Right. Israel's use of our military aid for offensive purposes rather than defensive purposes.
Why aren't we saying?
And why aren't we saying we can enforce the provisions of our own laws? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because we're beholden
You
to
will
that,
never be
that
elected.
system.
I'm asking this seriously.
No,
I'm not,
and I don't, huh? Oh, Mike's.
Yeah, I loved your question, and I wish that you could take that somewhere to somebody who would answer that for you. I mean, to be honest, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that Israel's our friend, and we're not going to do that. We're allies. I totally get that there's all sorts of violations. There's all sorts of things like that, and there's plenty of people that are lobbying for ending this stuff, you know, through different ways, whether it's BDS, whether it's, you know, claiming that what they're doing are violations and that we are complicit in it. But as far as like, I don't have an answer. Okay. I don't have an answer.
Okay.
But that's a great question, and I would love it for you to take it to a lawyer and get that answered. And I'd love to know the answer.
I just wanted to add in here, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Nora Barrows-Friedman's great work with the BDS movement in her latest book. So those of you that aren't familiar, Nora used to be on Flashpoint with Dennis Bernstein. She's with Electronic Intifada, and she's done a lot of great work. And once again, we're also talking about the power of students, right, and young people. We hear a lot in our society that young people are maybe apathetic or dialed out or busy exercising their thumbs and playing video games. And maybe some of them are, but you know, some of them also are here, and some of them are also our students, and many of them are really doing things, and they have a lot at stake, and they're the ones that are really pushing and challenging, you know, these things, like what just happened at Columbia University, you know, last week with divestment from other, like fossil fuels and different kinds of things. These things are happening, you know, and we need to kind of get over the trope of, you know, that the young people aren't as cool as they used to be once upon a time.
Hold on one second. So I also can connect you with a woman who's working on legal issues in terms of Palestine if you want to exchange information later, and we can, yeah, because I would love to get that question answered for you.
I just want to add one more thing about this. This is a 4-year cycle where local congressional people come and have to talk to us. And this is a time when groups like Peace Now and Jewish Voice for Peace have a chance to do lobbying on this kind of issue.
I've done it.
And right, so
I just have to get somewhere.
that's yeah, keep doing it and get your friends to do it. This is the time.
Professor Pilisuk, speaking about the 4-year cycle, 2 weeks ago, Senator Bernie Sanders finally spoke his first word about foreign policy in South Carolina, stating that a vote against the Iran treaty was a vote for World War III. However, Senator Sanders has never made a statement concerning any foreign policy, has never made a statement against any war, has never made a statement against Israel in this whole campaign while advocating democratic socialism. I wonder if you could comment on that.
No, the Sanders campaign has never asked me to be a consultant as much as I would like to, but I know that there are groups that are working on the Sanders campaign or working to affect the Sanders campaign, and they have had some effect in the Black Lives Matter issue, where his overt positions have changed. And right now, one of the things I understand that they're working on is to try to find for him a politically viable way to make this kind of an issue. I think that there are politically viable ways. I think that a majority of the American population would definitely be for this position that you're suggesting. But that doesn't mean that the powers that present that opinion are being swayed yet. So it's not a solution, but it's a struggle. It's an invitation to get in, and it's easy to criticize him for not doing it.
Sorry.
It's harder to figure the way to make him do it.
On the subject of compassion, I wanted to address the Syrian refugee problem and the lack of response from the rich Arab countries of Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, This has been reported in the BBC, Reuters, Agence France Presse. They have failed to react. And item number 2 regarding the PLO, what about all the corruption in the PLO and Yasser Arafat and his family stealing $1 billion of assets, and Yasser Arafat's wife living large in Paris?
Okay. Yeah, totally. Corruption's everywhere, right? And certainly in terms of the mock government, PLO, PA, and all of that that's going on in there, it's not doing any sort of good for any of the people right now. It's a mess, and the way that the Arab countries handled the Syrian issue and kind of turned a blind eye, yes, that's not okay. I completely agree.
And as Donna pointed out in her dissertation, the people that she was speaking with were not really concerned about the affiliation with the PLO or with Hamas. They were concerned with getting across the checkpoints to be able to visit their neighbor, to shop, or to move about safely. And it seems that we recognize this level of corruption and special and interconnected interests up there. And I think that we have to continue to remind ourselves that that's not the only reality. That there is this reality on the ground that's fighting against that.
Boy, you bring up a lot of issues. I'm a Palestinian American, and so I go way back. I came when I was 13, and I remember trying through different political groups to make some effect. And the issue is, actually, we just moved to Petaluma, so we're new. And we don't know anybody. But anyway, we used to live in the DC area, so our friends were pretty much the politicians, the senators, the congressmen, whatever. So the problem is, even if you relate to these people and they really understand your issue, after a few drinks they will tell you they will never, never, never say it, because they will never, never be elected, even at the smallest level. So for me, who's 63 years old, and I've been doing, I've been worried about this since I was 13, and talking about having to change who I am, because my father said to me, don't say you're Palestinian because then you're a terrorist, say you're Jordanian. So I said, I'm Jordanian for the longest time. Then, don't say you're this, you're Muslim because this, so, it's very, very, very hard, and people don't understand. Even though we are more similar than we are dissimilar, people, for some reason, if they haven't really met Palestinians, they think you're different. We're really not that different at all, to the Christians or to the Jews or to anybody else, actually. We're just all human beings who are just trying to make things work. But anyway, I got emotional, so I'm off my point. But maybe next time I'll stay not emotional and I'll be a little bit brighter. About the Arabs not taking in the Syrians, you're so right, and it's so wrong. But you have to remember too, there's also a game of what he's talking about, that group of people. If you notice, Jordan takes in a lot of Syrians, and they can barely take care of their own. They've already taken in a lot of Palestinians. The last thing they need is a lot of Syrians. Turkey takes in a lot. There is there's a game that's being played even between the Gulf states and these players that they're talking about. So it's not what we think. It's never what we think. That's what's so sad. Sorry.
I want to welcome you to Petaluma.
Thank you.
And as an East Coaster, it's a good move. The West Coast is very sunny and warm, as you've seen today.
Thank you very much. I certainly appreciate appreciate both presentations and the dialogue group. I wanted to call attention and ask a question about connections between the macro scale about which we're speaking and the micro scale. And the old adage, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. The Little Orphan Annie, Daddy Warbucks story you told, Marc, assumes that somewhere in the Daddy Warbucks there is a conscience, there is the capability of remorse. And the British psychologist Kevin Dutton wrote a paradoxically, or perhaps ironically entitled book called The Wisdom of Psychopaths. And he indicates that certain professions have much higher rates of psychopathy than are found in the population at large. And among these are corporate CEOs, which does not mean all corporate CEOs, politicians, attorneys, etc. This is based on empirical research in the UK. And I think it's significant that the Bohemian Club, about which you write in your book, that meets not too far from here, burns an effigy of care at the beginning of their Bacchanalian revels and secret hobnobbing in Bohemian Grove every year. They burn an effigy of care. I don't know what that symbolizes to them, but to me it's scary that they're vowing that, you know, us or, you know, and you know, who the hell cares after it. So I just think that we cannot assume that these people in the networks that you are describing have the same capacity for conscience and appeal if only we could get close to them. I think that the fate of the earth is in our as well as our understanding these global patterns and our understanding the roots of their kinds of personality disorders, if I'll be so bold as to say it. And one further point, years ago I read a reference of in something by Alfred Cohn, who said there was some research that the people who are primarily preoccupied with the accumulation of wealth and power rather than the cultivation of loving, compassionate human relationships often came from very unnurturing families of origin that had cold, unresponsive parenting, and they turned inward, and it just, you know, them against the world, and they were going to prove they're better, and they're just focused on secondary gratifications rather than the primary gratification we get through love and compassion and human solidarity and the things that you guys are advocating so beautifully. So just a few editorial comments from the wings here.
I would like to ask you to give a perspective, to think ahead, like both of you, perspective of how you see the situation in the Middle East evolving, say 5 years from now, 10 years from now. How would you see it? How would you like to see it?
Like to see it is probably not how I'll see it, but I'd love to see an equitable situation where everybody can live. I mean, one state, two state is sort of there's different reasons for both. When I was there, the people in the West Bank actually want a two-state solution. I don't know if that's possible at this point with the, you know, settlement expansions and such, but however it ends up happening, a place where everybody has equal access to things, to life, to jobs, to human rights. Do I see that happening in the next 5 years? Not if something doesn't change drastically. And something changing drastically would involve the United States certainly stepping in and saying, we're not going to fund you anymore unless this changes. And I don't see that happening at this point. I don't know if it'll happen in my lifetime, you know? But I would like to see that, but it doesn't really matter what I like, does it?
Well, it's hard to draw lessons from the Arab Spring. I mean, clearly one lesson was that there were people who were living under really brutal and authoritarian conditions for long periods of time, could unexpectedly ignite behind a force to get rid of those authorities. There were all kinds of things that went wrong with that, but the causes for that happening still exist. So when we say something like Saudi Arabia is not taking in any Syrian refugees, we're talking about the Saudi Arabian royal family. We have no idea what ordinary Saudis think. And in the same way with Egypt, now we have no way of knowing what ordinary Egyptians think. And we know that these rulers, with American help, have gotten more sophisticated ways of controlling unrest, but we also know that the unrest hasn't stopped, that people are continuing to organize, and my hope within 5 years is that there will be inroads into the conditions under which the United States gives its support. It will issue certain kind of conditions about human rights that will create pressures for modest differences in the way these countries rule themselves.
Just to say one thing also about actually something that does seem to be working on a small scale is the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement within the Palestinian civil society. People are, talking about boycotting and divesting, just like what they did in South Africa. And it's not happening a lot in the United States, but in Europe it's happening more. And, banks are divesting from companies that are profiting from occupation and such. And so there is, that's a nonviolent way to put pressure on the state of Israel to change their ways. And, if people got behind that's something that I could see working.
I'd like to make a couple just conclusive remarks for the evening and give you all some time to mill around a bit while the cafe closes. And just was pulling from a passage here from the end of Marc and Jennifer's book, The Hidden Structure of Violence. It says, the challenge to contemporary patriots is to find the courage to guard our souls against pressures to accept a violent world and its promoters as inevitable. It is to take from the promises of a democratic heritage the task of hearing all voices, of reinventing loyalty to the entire human family and to the ecology that sustains it. The obstacles have been described. We can now move on to the question of whether wonderful projects, large and small, for peace, justice, and sustainability hold any hope for changing the colossus. There are reasons to believe this can happen and that the process has begun. And of course, they go on to list the work of Ralph Nader and the public interest research groups, and even some of the work at the United Nations, even though it has received great criticism over the years from both right and left. Also mentions pro-democracy groups in Burma, Iran, and Haiti, among other places, including mentioning the Occupy movement that has also morphed itself into a Jubilee movement, helping people with foreclosures and on bum mortgages and the like. A lot of people say, what happened to Occupy? Well, many of the people in Occupy got busy and started helping people in need, and they're not looking for the camera, they're looking to make a difference. Sometimes the camera can catch that difference, but of course what we do at Project Censored, and as Marc and Jennifer point out in the book here, we can't rely on the corporate media to tell our stories. And in fact, it ends here, but saying these events are parts of a story being written by people outside of the main circles of power, and with room for pages that each of us may add. That is the topic for another book, and I would suggest that that's the topic of our book, and we should write it together. So I'd like to thank Professor Marc Pilisuk, Dr. Susan Rahman, for joining us this evening and sharing with us. Also like to thank Alexandria McDowell and Caitlin McCoy, students with us at Project Censored. Thank all of you. Also like to thank and welcome Peter Phillips, who came in late after giving his War and Peace lecture. Remember earlier when I said that Susan was talking about how Marc was her professor. Well, Marc was also Peter's professor, and Peter, of course, has been my professional mentor at Project Censored. So we all share and learn from each other, and I think that that's sort of a great note for us to end on for now. We will be here next month, second Tuesday, for the Project Censored book release with our new book and a lot of different students and contributors. We hope you come out. We'll be here in November, hopefully with Peter Byrne, in December possibly with Meta Center. So if you want to learn more about what we're up to, go to projectcensored.org. Please thank everybody at AQUS CAFÉ, and if you are able to, please be friendly and tip all of the great help here this evening. So thanks so much for coming out, and if you want to come on up and talk and mill about, that would be fantastic. The cafe will be closing, I believe, in about 10 minutes. We do have books for sale. So thank you all for coming out. We'll see you next time.